You're listening to Midlife State of Mind podcast, hosted by Erin, a midlife gal who dishes on all the challenges and opportunities that come with this middle section of your life. Each episode, you'll find yourself going between laughter and tears as she covers all the topics you need to know about midlife.
Welcome back to Midlife State of Mind. I'm your host, Erin. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode today. If you've been a long-time listener of the podcast, you know that I have 3 grown sons. And one of my greatest desires is to have a healthy relationship with all of them. Navigating this is tricky as it has required me to make that shift from the parent figure, which is the one that has done the disciplining, the guiding, and basically controlling most of the situations, to having more of an equal relationship with mutual respect, understanding, and consideration. And some of the keys that I have really focused on to entail that I have this healthy relationship with them is I try not to ever offer unsolicited advice. I allow them to make their own mistakes and keep my mouth shut. And I just try to love them for the unique individual that they are. It doesn't mean that I always get it right, but I just always strive to respect them as the adults that they are. And a further aspect of ensuring a healthy relationship with grown children is allowing them to have their own take on events that happen in childhood. So this means that even though 2 people have the same experience, they can have a completely different experience and remember things completely different. And so while, some of the things that when my kids talk about, and I don't remember it the way that they do. And this past weekend, my family was at a family member's wedding. We traveled out of town. So all of my nuclear family was together. So my 3 sons, my husband, and myself. And this exact situation transpired this weekend. So as you do at weddings, you're celebrating, you may partake of some alcoholic beverages, which if you know me in real life, you know that I actually don't drink and I didn't drink. But one of my sons had probably a little bit too much to drink. And so as we were chatting, he had made several comments about having that he's going to die young or something. And he had said it several times. And so I had said to him, please do not say that to me anymore because it is very upsetting to me. Because as your mother, I feel like it just really upsets me to hear you say that. Even though I know that he's kidding, it just doesn't sit right with me. And he made the comment that, don't make it about you. And I'm like, well, it's hard for me not to make it about me because I gave birth to you and I love you and your brothers more than anything in this life. And so I will always worry about you. And somehow it got completely, this innocent interaction ended up turning quite serious when he brought up something from childhood, and I won't share the details because it's personal and it would be his place to share, that I remembered completely different. And he was just going on, and at first I was kind of confused because I was like, what are you even talking about? I'm thinking to myself, that's not how it happened. But I continued to listen because, like I said, it's not uncommon for 2 people to experience the same event and have a completely different experience and take on it. Obviously, that's going to happen even with parents and children. And it becomes an even greater divide when the parent feels like they're being attacked or implicated for events that took place in their child's life that their child has now maybe had a negative recollection of. And so that's kind of how I was feeling as we're having this conversation. And I was just like, wow, what is this about? I first have to say I make no claims to being a parenting expert. And so you should definitely seek professional help if your situation calls for it. All I want to do is share my own experience and how I handle the situation and the resolution. As I was having this conversation with him and he was adamant that this particular event transpired the way it did, I just had to ask myself, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle this? And so one of the things that I have really found is that first and foremost is that I have to be willing and emotionally able to accept feedback from my child without taking it personally and without getting defensive. So I had to really be careful about how I was going to respond to what he was saying and not get defensive, because anytime we feel like we're being attacked, or I get defensive. But getting defensive would be counterproductive to making any progress. And so by me staying open to receive his perspective perspective and allowing him to be understood and validated by me without me trying to insert my recollection or try to argue back. And so as we were talking, I apologized. I said, I'm very sorry because everything I ever have done for you and your brothers, I've done with your best interests in mind with the information that I had at the time. And I think that apologizing to your child for your parenting regrets can be really transformational. And I just even saw the change in him and in how we interacted. It's giving them proof that you love them enough to validate their pain so that they can then have a genuine relationship with you that is rooted in reality. In their reality, even if it's not your reality. But by doing that, by validating their experience, it doesn't invalidate your own. So that means that two different experiences can simultaneously exist at the same time with neither of them negating the other. And I have to say that this is not easy and it's very tricky to negotiate it because there are definitely times when if you do this, and myself included, you'll get it wrong. But it's absolutely worth it at the end of the day to put forth the effort to have a whole healed relationship with your child. So as we ended up having this conversation, we ended up abling it for the moment because he had quite a bit to drink. And I don't think he was making his case appropriately for himself because anytime you're under the influence of alcohol, you're not always thinking right. But there is that saying that the two people that tell the truth the most are toddlers and drunk people. So I knew that this was coming from somewhere, that he was maybe harboring some resentment or something hadn't been resolved about this situation. So in our situation, we had a conversation the next day that was very productive. My apology was accepted. And then he actually sent me a text a day later that just apologized to me for the way that he had approached the situation and that how he loved me. But I think if I had doubled down on sticking to my guns of how I remembered the situation and did not just take the time to listen to him and to validate his experience and to see how it had affected him, we wouldn't have come to that resolution. It probably would have just driven a wedge between us that maybe wouldn't cause us to not have contact. I often say that most relationships don't end over something major. It's not like one major thing, whether it's a parent-child relationship or a spouse relationship or a friendship. It's usually 1,000 little things that kind of add up over time to where the person's finally like, I'm done. I mean, most people don't just have like a major break, like you're dead to me. I think if I had dug my heels in, which I have to admit I'm very stubborn, but I'm trying to really grow as a person, becoming more compassionate, more understanding, and really allowing myself to not always be right. Sometimes having a healed relationship is way more important than being right. And it's taken me into my mid-50s to really embrace that. I mean, I've always known it intellectually, but really embodying that emotionally and energetically is a different thing. So I just wanted to share, just to ask you, have you had any situations where your adult child or maybe almost adult child has maybe mentioned something to you about a situation that you remember as something completely different? How did you handle it? Were you able to listen to them, being open to their feedback, even if it is negative, and validate them? Or do you take the stance of digging your heels in and saying, no, I remember it this way and I'm right? It's just really interesting human psychology. It's kind of that bystander effect, if you will, even where they say two people can witness the same event and have completely different takes. Like if there's a bank robbery, well, the gunman was wearing a yellow shirt with white stripes and the other person says he was wearing a white shirt with yellow stripe. So we all perceive things based on our past experiences and just all of the things that make us unique, that make us have this very different experience than anyone else. It's the beauty of being a human, an individual human. So I'd love to hear from you and I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. You can share them with me on Instagram or Facebook, Midlife State of Mind Podcast, or you can head to my website, midlifestateofmindpodcast.com, and you can send me a message there. If you are a new listener to the podcast, welcome. I would love to have you hit the follow button so that you can stay in the loop whenever a new episode releases each week. If there has been any episode that has particularly resonated with you, and if you enjoy the content that I create, I would be most grateful if you would leave me a rating and a written review on whatever podcast platform you are listening to me on. Lastly, if you are interested in some additional ways that you can support the podcast, take a look at the show notes and you'll see a list of my favorite things. These are products that I use and I love, and I'd share them with any of my best girlfriends. If you do choose to purchase any of the products with the links, then the podcast does earn a small commission that just helps offset some of the expenses of producing it. My podcast is a place where we can inspire each other to make positive changes and embrace all that midlife has to offer. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another episode. See you then. Bye.
This has been an E Squared production.